Marina, and today I'd like to present a very interesting topic for me. It's attachment and personality. Okay, so I'll be looking at the relationship of attachment and personality through two perspectives. First is the trait perspective, and the second is the psychodynamic perspective. And then I'm very interested of exploring the relationship of attachment and mental health, and how that could contribute to any predisposition for any development of personality disorders. Okay, so first is the attachment and personality through the trait perspective. I'd like to look at the trait perspective using the Big Five personality traits. So a quick overview. The Big Five contributes of extroversion, which is the tendency to be talkative and sociable and more outgoing. Agreeableness is to be cooperative and altruistic and to have trust. Conscientiousness is to be more hardworking, persistent, and organized. And neuroticism is the tendency to have emotional instability or to experience moodiness or anxiety. And lastly is openness, is to be open to experiences and new things and be curious. Next, I'll be exploring how the attachment styles can influence these traits and how they can be developed. Firstly, I want to emphasize that this is only one study. Other results can be obtained. So the findings of the studies found that secure attachment is more likely to have a positive correlation with extroversion and agreeableness. And I was surprised that it had no correlation with openness, and it had a positive correlation with conscientiousness, and a negative correlation with neuroticism. Next. Okay, so now we're moving on to the insecure attachments. Firstly, we all know that anxious attachment is an insecure attachment, and neuroticism is as well an insecurity in its own way, so it has a positive correlation with it. Next, it had also no correlation with openness, and no significant correlation with conscientiousness and agreeableness. But it had a negative correlation with extroversion, but only in the dominance aspect, not the sociability aspect. And now the avoidance attachment, it had a positive correlation with the neuroticism. As mentioned before, it's an insecure attachment as well as anxious attachment, and neuroticism is a form of insecurity as well. So this is why it's more likely to be positively correlated with it. And conscientiousness had a negative correlation with it, but that was found in some studies. It had a negative correlation with openness, more in terms of openness to feelings, and a negative correlation with extroversion. It scored low on extroversion in the terms of positive emotions and warm facets. And lastly, it's negatively correlated with agreeableness, and especially low in the trust and altruism facets. Other traits I found in the study that was correlated with avoidance is low on assertiveness, warmth, gregariousness, which is openness to enjoying company with others, and positive emotions. Okay, so secondly, the psychodynamic perspective on attachment and personality. So firstly, I'd like to connect both theories together, and why I chose this theory for attachment. Bowlby was actually a psychoanalyst that saw himself as retracing Freud's steps, but he chose a different approach of using theoretical and empirical strategies. That's the difference. Both theories also highlighted the fact that adult behavior can be explained through childhood. They highlight the importance of child experiences. Bowlby and Ainsworth proposed that humans are driven by innate behavior just like Freud did, that in adaptation and survival. and they both interpreted the infant-mother bond as a fundamental need for protection and safety. And both theories, lastly, emphasize the dynamic unconscious processes. Okay, so firstly is the secure attachment. I'll be looking at it through some concepts in the psychodynamic theory. First is the internal working model. Individuals with a secure attachment are more likely to develop a positive internal working models on themselves and others. And they're more likely to develop a healthy ego that can balance between both the id and the super ego. Anxious attachment, on the other hand, are more likely to develop a negative internal working models, especially of themselves, and that could manifest in the form of defense mechanisms such as projection and fantasy. Projection can be in the way of they project their insecurities and fears and anxious feelings towards the others and more prominent in like relationships with significant others. And fantasy, they are more likely to retreat into a safe place due to the anxieties that they experience all the time. Yes. An avoidant attachment is also seen to be more likely to develop a negative internal working model, and especially towards others, as opposed to the anxious, it's more to themselves. And their defense mechanisms could be emotional withdrawal, so they can avoid vulnerability and being vulnerable with others and expressing their emotions, as well as repression, because repression would help them not be vulnerable with their emotions as well. So I'd like to delve deeper into some concepts of the psychodynamic theory. For example, first thing is internalization, which is how it's connected to attachment is that early attachment experiences are internalized, which forms the foundations of the individual's personality. Through developing expectations about the caregiver's ability, serves as a basis for internal working models of themselves and of others. Next is object relations. It's the way that individuals relate to others in their childhood, influences their early object relations, which can be shown in relationships with significant others. And attachment theory and object relations theory both describe interpersonal relationships from childhood throughout the lifespan. And lastly, the unconscious conflicts. Unconscious conflicts stemming from early attachment experiences can manifest in various ways, including personality disorders. An example of that is disorganized attachment is a result of significant unconscious conflicts and traumas. Okay, so now we'll explore the connection between attachment and mental health. I included secure attachment, and it's linked towards mental health in how it has a possible low probability for mental issues. So secure attachment they're more likely to be resilient, which could contribute to healthy coping mechanisms. So it's less likely they will develop personality disorders or any mental health issues. As well, they're more likely to have healthy relationships, so their positive view of themselves and of others fosters healthy relationships, which reduces the risk of maladaptive coping patterns, which are very prominent in personality disorders. Next, I'd like to explore insecure attachment through anxiety and depression. Attachment anxiety is especially related to depression, vulnerability, and anxiety facets of neuroticism, like I mentioned before. And I found a very interesting theory that I've never heard of. It's depressive personality styles constructed by Blatt and Beck, and how they confirm to vulnerability and depression. So the study found that the dependency personality style was associated with the anxious attachment style, while self-criticism is associated with fearful and avoided attachment style. So here you have a connection with depression, personality, and attachment. Secondly, I'd like to stress the fact that mental illness does not necessarily mean it will result in aggression, but I'd like to explore aggression and hostility as personality traits or behaviors, not as the personality as a whole. So studies have found that aggression is linked to insecure attachment, and there's significant association between more frequent forms of attachment and the more reactive forms of aggression involving expectations of hostility from others. And self-harm was significantly associated with relational avoidance, and other irritability was associated with relational anxiety. Okay, so lastly, I'd like to explore the attachment style and personality disorder. Okay, so we have to understand the link before we proceed. Attachment style can influence personality development, but it's not the sole determinant of personality disorders. However, certain attachment style can create a predisposition for certain disorders. Okay, so firstly is the borderline personality disorder. The study I found had an indirect association between insecure attachment and borderline. It had a correlation between insecure attachment patterns and a trait disposition towards negative affect and impulsivity, as well as correlation between insecure attachment patterns and the risk for maladaptive personality traits, which all underlie borderline personality traits. The most common attachment style is the disorganized attachment for borderline. Secondly is the dependent personality disorder. Insecure attachment have a correlation with distorted cognitive schemas and dysfunctional emotional interactions, which contributes to a dependent personality. Anxious and avoidant both have a deep fear of abandonment, which could manifest in the form of coping mechanisms, in the clingy behaviors and the need for constant reassurance and depending on other people for their own self-worth and well-being. And this dependence can be seen in relationships, in substance abuse, and in other areas. Okay, thirdly, antisocial personality disorder. There was a study conducted on college students, that experienced negative parenting styles were more likely to exhibit features of anti-personality disorder in adulthood, and that parenting styles consisted of controlling parenting or negative love of mothers. So it's common in disorganized attachment, which could be a result of a negative love of mothers, like we've seen in the study above it, and also in avoidant attachment, as they're more likely to not have trust towards others, they're more likely to distance themselves from others, which could manifest in behaviors that disregard social norms and relationships, which could be a result of negative internal working models of others. Second is the obsessive compulsive disorder. Anxious attachment styles are very preoccupied towards having order and being perfectionists. So that could stem from childhood experiences that was inconsistent, unpredictable. So it created the need to have the need for control. Second is the avoidant attachment, and they often prioritize work and productivity over leisure and social relations, which is found to be aligned with the third criterion of obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And lastly, fearful avoidant may desire close relationships, but they might fear it. So in order to maintain that, they show some compulsive obsessive behavior in order to maintain the stress in their relationships. And lastly is the narcissistic personality disorder. I found a study that found a correlation between narcissism and insecure attachment, where attachment anxiety was found to be correlated with vulnerable narcissism. which is a form of hypersensitivity to rejection and excessive unconsciousness. And avoidance was correlated with grandiose narcissism, which it's excessive feelings of superiority and positive emotions on oneself. So this is the relation that I found between narcissism and the insecure attachment. And here are my resources. Thank you. Does anyone have questions?
Any questions?
لا بس عايزه اقول حاجه حاسه ان the topic was complicated شويه اللي هو في factors كتير قوي that she needs to consider. You did that very well.
Exactly. Very well researched.
It has a lot of things that you have to take into consideration with terminologies والحتت اللي في الأول بتاعت personality and the different theories. It is quite complicated and it's a great job with that. برافو عليكي. It's actually حتة mental health and adoption من أكتر الحاجات اللي دايما الناس تسأل عليها اللي هو attachment style, previous والحاجات أكتر من حاجات تانية. فا it's a very برافو عليكي.